cell phones in their pockets and their purses. So the call was transferred to Silent Solutions. The system then asks them to dial 55. They get no response. Then there is an automated message that says, quote, "Nothing has been heard from the caller exchange. Please disconnect the line." The 17-year-old Hannah Foster was a very determined girl. She was dedicated to her schooling, and on March 14th, she had just found out that she had straight A's. She had recently been accepted to 2 different universities to study medicine. She had wanted to be a doctor for as long as she could remember. Hannah loved to read and to draw, and she was very passionate about music. Her favorite band was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. She was also very involved with her community. She volunteered a lot. When she was younger, she had been in ballet, and she had loved ballet, but in her early teens, she had to give up this passion because of some knee problems. So Hannah leads a pretty busy life. She's kind of doing it all. Good grades, volunteer work, but she still made sure to carve out time to hang out with her friends. And on this particular Friday night, Hannah was getting ready to go hang out with her best friend, Helen. It was Friday, March 14th, 2003, and the girls just wanted to go blow off some steam. They worked very hard at school. They were getting good grades, and they just wanted to go celebrate. So they decided to meet up and go downtown. Helen came and met Hannah at her family's home in Southampton, which is on the southern coast of England. Hannah lived in this cute little tree-lined neighborhood with her parents, Trevor and Hillary, and her little sister, Sarah, who was 14. The Fosters were a very close family. They were very supportive of each other, and they had strong bonds. So on March 14th, she gets dressed in a light brown long-sleeve polo jumper, a brown skirt, knee-high boots, and a coat. She sticks her cell phone into a khaki purse and gets ready to leave. Now, her cell phone had been a gift that her parents had gotten her. It was a prepaid phone, and so she had this phone that her parents were paying for. Before the 2 girls left that night, they turned on some music. They were dancing around in the Foster kitchen with Hannah's little sister, and Hannah was telling her little sister, who was 14, that she couldn't wait till she was a little older and she could go out with the girls. Helen and Hannah left the Foster family home with Hillary standing at the front door, waving to the 2 girls as they left. Helen and Hannah headed about a mile to Southampton's inner city area, which was a very popular area for students. There was like a lot of nightlife. They stopped at the Bend Brief, which was a bar, and Helen was actually meeting her mom here so her mom could give her some cash for their night out. The 2 girls then walked around the corner to the Hobbit, which was a pub, where they ordered double bus stop was only a 5-minute walk from Hannah's house, and she was planning on just walking home alone. At 5 a.m. the next morning, Hannah's mother, Hillary, wakes up to get ready to go to the hospital where she works. And as she's walking down the hallway, she notices Hannah's bedroom door is wide open. But Hannah always slept with her door closed, so she knows something is off. She fully begins to panic just minutes later when, after a complete search of the home, she realizes Hannah isn't there. Now, sometimes Hannah would go out with friends and decide to crash at one of their houses, but she always texted her mom. So Hillary kind of nervously leaves her house and heads for work after texting her daughter, asking her where she was and if she was okay. But by the time Hillary gets to the hospital, Hannah hasn't responded. By 6:30 a.m., she's already made half a dozen calls to Hannah's cell phone, and Hannah's not picking up any of these calls. Hannah's little sister had also left the night before to go out. She was going to be gone for the weekend, and she gets this frantic phone call from her mother asking if she's heard from Hannah. Sarah hadn't heard from Hannah, but she has Helen's telephone number, so she calls Helen to see if Hannah had slept at her house. And this is when they find out the last time Helen had seen Hannah was around 10:30ish the night before at the bus stop. Hillary left work and began the frantic process of calling all of Hannah's friends to see if they knew where she was. Unfortunately, no one had seen Hannah. Hannah's father then rushes home from work and calls the authorities to report his daughter missing around 10:30 a.m. As soon as police arrive at the foster home, they begin investigating. I guess they had brought canines with them. The home was searched, but police couldn't find anything. They began interviewing family and the neighbors, but no one had really seen Hannah since she had taken off with Helen the night before. Hannah's phone was still on, which was good, and the police instructed her family to stop trying to call her because with every call, they were draining the battery, and they were going to try to pull the pings to see where Hannah was. Police were able to get Hannah's cell phone information pretty quickly, and they learn a couple of things. First of all, they see that her mother has been repeatedly calling her all morning. Her phone was also moving. It had been traveling from Southampton to Portsmouth, and then it stopped. Phone records showed that Hannah's phone had made a 999 call at 11 p.m. the night before. So this call would have been placed just 10 minutes after leaving Helen as she drove off on the bus. So investigators are extremely interested in this 999 call. They think it can help them, figure out where Hannah is. So they get a recording and they just hear the dispatcher asking several times if there was an emergency, and then the call was transferred to silent services, and then it was ended. The police brought in audio text to try and enhance the audio, and they were able to pick up a very quiet, muffled conversation between two people. There was a female voice, and it was identified as Hannah. She sounded very scared, and she was talking to a man who police said was older, and I don't know how they know this from a recording, but he also spoke with a South Asian accent, and he had like very broken English. There were also traffic noises, and police were somehow able to determine that there were some mechanical noises that indicated they were traveling in a large vehicle, most likely a van. Some parts of this call were completely inaudible, but they were able to form like a partial transcript. During the conversation, Hannah is lying to the man, telling him that she's 15 years old and that her name is Sarah. She is then heard saying, quote, that's my road. That's where I live. The man then instructed her to hold her head down, please. It was at this point that the call was transferred to silent services. So it's obvious to police that they are listening to an abduction. It is also obvious that Hannah had called 911 trying to raise the alarm that she was in trouble, and she was hoping that the dispatcher would overhear the conversation and help her. Hannah was not aware of the silent services or silent solutions, so she didn't realize that if she did not push buttons, her call would be disconnected. At 2 p.m. the day after Hannah went missing, a woman and her teenage son were driving through the west end of a village in Southampton. They were driving on a very rural road when the teenage son spotted something in a ditch, and so they pulled over and found the fully clothed body of a young female. They called police, who arrived within minutes, and they were able to ID the dead woman as Hannah Foster. An autopsy was done, and it showed that Hannah had been beaten and sexually assaulted before being strangled to death. A toxicology test was done, and it came back that she had no traces of alcohol or other drugs in her system when she died. When Hannah was found, she was wearing shoes, but her feet were caked in dirt, and her clothing was also described as being in disarray, which indicated that her clothing had been taken off and then her body had been redressed. She had scratch marks on her neck, which were determined to be defensive wounds that she had gotten from desperately trying to pry the attacker's hands off of her neck. Traces of semen were found on Hannah's coat, and so police were lucky with this because they did have DNA, but when they ran it through their system, they didn't get any hits, so it wasn't a match to anyone whose DNA was in their database. The Fosters were devastated by the news of Hannah's murder, and they had to actually go down and formally ID her body. Her mother later said, quote, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There must be some mistake. was the sparkle in her eyes, the radiant smile, the warmth and tenderness of her touch. Hannah was vibrant, graceful, gentle, and so alive. I felt numb and paralyzed by grief and pain. Why Hannah? She had so much to live for, so much unfulfilled promise, so many talents, so much humanity and compassion to share. End quote. Police took Hannah's computer from her home and they had police texts searching through her history, trying to see if maybe she had made plans to meet up with someone after she had left Helen at the bus stop. But nothing was found and police ruled out this possibility. Police then went to the media and asked anyone who was in the area that night that Hannah was killed to come forward. This was huge news. The media was covering the murder of this beautiful young woman and everyone knew about it. During a press conference, a spokesperson from the police basically warned that while this was the first incident like this in the area, they just kind of advised people, look, we don't know who did this. Use extreme caution. Don't go out at night. Stay in groups. Don't walk home alone until we can determine exactly what happened here. CCTV footage was pulled from the area. It captured the two friends walking through the area that night, and there wasn't really anything of significance captured in the footage that would tell police what happened. Some people began to speculate that maybe Hannah had changed her mind and didn't want to walk home, and she had gotten into a cab and had been attacked by a cab driver. But the bus stop was literally a 5-minute walk to her house. So police didn't think this was likely, but they did have to rule it out as a possibility. So they asked all taxi drivers who had been in the area at the time if anyone had picked up a young girl matching her description to come forward and talk to them. 24 hours after Hannah's body was discovered, a guy working at a recycling plant in Portsmouth, which remember was the last location of her phone pinging. So this guy's working at a recycling plant and he looks down in a bin and he notices a khaki-colored purse with a cell phone inside of it. These items had been being looked for by police, so the media was aware that these items were missing. Both items were confirmed to be Hannah. At the site where Hannah's body was found, it became like a vigil for Hannah. There were flowers and balloons and stuffed animals left there. By March 19th, the police had received over 300 tips from the public. And this case got so big it was being reported nationally. Hillary and Trevor held a press conference, and they basically just begged for anyone with information to come forward so they could catch Hannah's killer. Police then began to expand the areas where her cell phone had pinged, and they began looking for CCTV footage in all of these areas. For whatever reason, and I was never able to really figure out how, police determined that Hannah had been in a van There were 7 vans cited in the footage at the exact times that Hannah's phone was going through the area. So police then began the task of tracking down all of the owners of these vans. They also knew that their killer had a South Asian accent, so it was likely whoever they were looking for was not originally from the UK. On March 26th, 10 days after Hannah was found, Crime Watch aired this segment about her death. Hillary and Trevor Foster made an appearance on Crime Watch, and they talked about their daughter's death. They said that it absolutely tore them apart, how terrified Hannah must have been, and they were really struggling with knowing what the last few moments of her life had been like. After this episode of Crime Watch aired, 90 new tipsters called in, and one of them was a man named James Dennis. James Dennis had noticed that one of his employees, a delivery driver named Meninder Sign Coley, had been acting really weird around the time Hannah Foster had been killed. He was a delivery driver for Hazelwood Foods, and on the night that Hannah was killed, Meninder had been in possession of his work van that he made these deliveries with. His delivery route even passed through key areas where Hannah's phone had also been tracked. When this call came in, investigators checked the registration numbers from the vans found on CCTV footage, and they realized that this Hazelwood delivery van was on their list. Police were able to find footage of the Hazelwood delivery van driving in different locations in the area where Hannah's body was found. At 3:15 the same morning, he went into the station and he began his normal delivery routine. Before he traveled to Portsmouth, which was where Hannah's phone and purse were later discovered. This sighting is very significant because police have his delivery route, and it doesn't go through Portsmouth, but they have footage of his van in the area where Hannah's purse was found. So, after leaving Portsmouth, he goes back to work, and he tells his boss that he only got through like half of his route, and he's super sick, and he needs to go home. Police pull all the information they can about this Meninder after they get a call. He had relocated to the UK from India in 1993 as part of an arranged marriage. He had married an Indian woman who was from the UK, and the couple had 2 children, although the marriage was not good, and neighbors told the police that they could always hear the couple yelling and screaming. Meninder was described as a drunk with a gambling problem. Within 1 hour of this tipster calling in, police had arrived at Hazelwood Foods to take possession of the van and search it forensically. Inside the van, they found traces of semen and blood spatter on a chrome bowl that was found inside the van. They also found several strands of hair. They sent all of this evidence to a crime lab to be tested, and then they headed to Meninders' to track down Meninders' wife and children who were staying at her parents' home. She don't believe that her husband had suddenly had to go back to India to take care of his mom, who was in a coma. She absolutely did not believe that her husband could be the person who killed Hannah. She's like, there is no way. This is a huge mistake. And now what she did, let police take a DNA sample from one of her sons so they could use it to compare to the DNA found at the scene to see if there was a familial link. Then investigators pulled CCTV footage from London's Heathrow Airport, and they spotted Meninder. He was in fact heading to India on March 18th, just 2 days after Hannah was killed. He was wearing a suit, but he only had a backpack, and he was caught boarding a flight to Delhi. Because the population in India is so dense, police said that trying to find Meninder was going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. They were not even sure if he would fly to India and try to hide out there, or if he would fly to India and then slip into like a bordering country. But the British police refused to give up. From England, Meninders' wife called his family in India, and his family said that he had been in town, which kind of shocked them because they didn't know he was coming. He had told his wife that he had to go take care of his mother, who was in a coma, but she had been in a coma for like 3 months, and he had made it seem like it had just happened and he had to like urgently leave the country. His entire family refused to believe that he could have been involved in Hannah's murder. The morning after his wife made this phone call to his family, Meninder shaved his head and his thick beard, and he went on the run. According to his family members, he didn't tell them where he was heading. Meninder's wife still refuses to believe that he's involved, but now she says he's being framed. She said that the day after Hannah went missing, Meninder came home and he was very upset. And he had a scratch on his face. And she is like, what happened? What's wrong? And he said that he had gone to a bar. And while he had been in the bar, someone had broken into his work van and put the body of a dead teenager inside. So he tells his wife he panicked and drove straight home. So he tells her this story, and then he goes to bed with a teenage girl's body in the back of the van. His wife said he slept for a few hours before waking up and leaving. The general secretary of a temple in Southampton came forward and told police that Meninder had come to him to borrow money, which he often did because he had a lot of gambling debts. But this time he said he needed the money to leave the country so he could go take care of his mother. But he tells Meninder no. He's borrowed money and he never pays it back. So police know pretty much right after Hannah was murdered, he began trying to make plans to leave the country. And they have a pretty solid case against him. But when the DNA evidence came in, seemed like a slam dunk. This was an open and shut case. The semen found in the delivery van was a match to the semen found on Hannah's coat. The blood spatter and hair were a match to Hannah Foster. So at this point, police know 100%, like, they have found their killer. Well, they know who their killer is. Actually finding him was going to be very difficult. On April 3rd, an international warrant was issued for Meninder. They were charging him with murder, manslaughter, kidnapping, false imprisonment, rape, and perverting the course of justice. Even though there was now this international warrant, finding him was going to be hard. On April 11th, the Foster family held Hannah's funeral services, and they released a statement that said, quote, "Today, family and friends are joining together to give thanks for the life of Hannah. Nothing can bring our beautiful daughter back to us, and today will not be easy for any of us. But we will find strength in each other, and strength in the continued support given to us by the community of Southampton and beyond." End quote. Hannah was laid to rest in a beautiful ceremony attended by her family and friends, fellow students, teachers, and even all of the police officers who had been working on her case. The service was also broadcast to a nearby church because the one where her actual funeral was taking place was packed with people. Her coffin was covered with pink flowers, and she was then cremated in a private service. On April 30th, 3 UK investigators flew to India to meet in person with Indian law enforcement members, as well as international police. While the Indian authorities knew Hannah's case was important because they had their own caseloads, and a murder of a British woman that didn't happen in India wasn't really a priority for them. People began to become very concerned that Meninder was never going to be caught and there would never be justice for Hannah Foster. Meninders' wife then releases a statement basically telling her husband to turn himself in so they can sort this all out. She still, at this point, believes that her husband is being framed. After 2 weeks in India, the police returned to the UK after kind of persuading the Indian authorities to actively search for Meninder. The problem was that Hannah's murder was not big news in India. It wasn't being reported at all, so they're in this country that is so jam-packed with people, but no one, there's no tips coming into police because the public is not aware of it. In early 2004, the Hampshire police announced a reward of £70,000 for anyone with information that leads to Meninder's arrest. The Foster family was heartbroken and extremely frustrated that this man had basically gotten away with murder. They wanted to see him behind bars. They wanted justice for Hannah. So Hannah's parents ended up flying to India and trying to spread awareness about their daughter's murder. And this actually worked. The Indian people became very his regular customers was Meninder. He knew this man as Mike, and he said every morning Mike would get, like all of the local newspapers, skim the headlines, and then throw them away within minutes of buying them. There was another man who called in to the tip line who said that the killer looked like a guest staying at his hotel named Mike Dennis. A barber and a news agent also recognized Meninder as one of their regular customers. A police officer who worked in India realized that Meninder looked like a friend of his new husband. And the officer knew where this friend was located. He was actually extremely helpful. But his friend was newly married and was working in a vaccination clinic where she had met this doctor who was there working from abroad, and the two had gotten married very quickly. So local police go to this address that is given to them, and it has been vacated. A neighbor told police that Mike Dennis had left on a bus to go to Nepal the day before. So, throughout this entire process, police are just one step behind Meninder. They show up at his house in the UK and he's gone. They barely miss him at the airport. They call his family and find out he's there, but then he goes on the run like he's always just a step ahead of them. The fact that he is heading to Nepal is really bad news because there is no extradition treaty with Nepal. So if he gets across the border, he's gone for good. The police immediately let the border patrol know that they are looking for him. Hillary and Trevor Foster are still in India doing kind of like a media tour to bring awareness when they receive word that Meninder has been arrested. There was an off-duty police officer who noticed him near the border, and after 16 months on the run, he was finally in police custody. Trevor Foster released a statement that he said, quote, "Never in our wildest dreams did we expect an arrest to be made while we were still in the middle of this short visit. We owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the Indian people. Not only have they come forward to facilitate this arrest, but they have taken Hillary and I into their hearts in the short time we have been here." End quote. Meninders' wife, his new second wife, is shocked at his arrest. She had no idea that she had just married an international fugitive. He had told her he was a doctor. She told the news, quote, "I love him so much. I know what the police are saying about him, but I can't believe it's true." Police suspected that Meninder's family, mainly his brothers, had been helping him while he'd been on the run. They'd been in contact with him. They'd been giving him money, and they were kind of giving him a heads up as to where the investigation was going. One of his brothers was actually a constable in India, so he knew exactly what was going on in the case, and this was how Meninder had evaded arrest for so long, he saw Hannah crossing the road, and he got into his van, and then he pulled up, got out of the van, grabbed her from behind, telling her to stay quiet. He then forced her into the van and drove her to an isolated area where he sexually assaulted her. After he raped her, she threatened to tell her parents and police about the assault, so he strangled her to death. During this confession, he said, quote, "I was out of my mind. It was only later that I realized I had destroyed my life." So during this confession, he claims he never told his wife anything about it, which totally contradicted what she had told police about how he was being framed. He then said he had fled to India because he needed his brother's help. Days after Meninders' confession aired, he retracted his statement, saying that the police had forced him to make it. And the media in the UK then prohibited any information about his confession to be printed. Meninder tried to make his extradition process as difficult as possible. There were so many little things that he was doing, not showing up to court, that delayed the process. And he would pretend to be sick, and then he claimed he would never get a fair trial in the UK. And then he and his brother both started saying that, the British police were being racist and he was being framed. In February of 2007, as the 4-year anniversary of Hannah's death was approaching, Hillary Foster gave this heart-wrenching interview to the media where she said, everywhere I turn, people are talking about Hannah's death. We're reading about the details of our daughter's murder, and we really want to remember the good times with Hannah. We want to remember her life, not her death. But it will be impossible to do so until this trial is behind us. Finally, after more than 35 appeals, it was finally decided that Meninder would be extradited back to the UK. And in 2007, exactly 3 years after his arrest, this process of they spent 16 months searching for him, then they arrest him, then it's still 3 years before they can even extradite him back. So 4 years total. He's finally charged with Hannah's murder. Meninder was actually the first person to be successfully extradited from India to the UK. His trial began in April of 2008. He had pled not guilty to all charges, and his confession had been deemed inadmissible in court. The prosecution still had, their physical evidence and circumstantial evidence, and it was still a solid case, even without his confession. The defense tried to point to Meninder's boss. Remember the tipster who had called in as the real killer? He said that, and remember, he had 4 years to think about this, to kind of come up with this wild story, but he basically said that he had borrowed money from his boss and he hadn't paid it back. And so James Dennis, his boss, had kidnapped him and forced him to rape a girl in the back of the work van, and then killed the girl and framed him as a way to repay him or to punish him for not repaying his debt. James James Dennis took the stand to deny this narrative. The 999 call that Hannah had placed the night she was killed was brought up during the murder trial. They had played a cleaned up version, so it was a lot easier to hear in court. The prosecutor said that he believed that Hannah had called 911 thinking the operator would listen to the conversation, realize she was in trouble, and send help. Unfortunately, Hannah had no idea that there was a new system in place to prevent pocket calls from clogging up the line. Hannah's call was disconnected after just 2 minutes, and no one ever realized she was in trouble. After a 6-week trial, the jury found Meninder guilty of Hannah's murder. He showed no emotion as the verdict was delivered, but Hannah's parents sobbed. In a victim impact statement, Hannah's mother said, quote, "When a mother gives birth, she has an immediate and instinctive need to nurture and protect her child. I would give anything to change places with Hannah, to take away the terror and pain she suffered that night. For the rest of my life, I will feel guilty that I wasn't there when she needed me most. She died terrified and alone with an evil stranger. I feel as though Kali has ripped out my heart and stamped on it. Hannah was a gentle, peace-loving girl who was never even able to cope with raised voices, and certainly not any threat of violence. She would have been frozen with fear, unable to run or fight. We cherish every moment we spent with Hannah. We have so many happy memories. I can see her now running along the beach with Sarah, stopping to do her ballet exercises. I miss her quite a lot. A sense of loss is unbearable, and we are heartbroken. Hannah, your short life enriched the lives of so many people. You will never be forgotten, loved forever, my darling girl. May you now rest in peace." Meninder was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 24 years to run concurrently with 12 years for rape, 6 years for false imprisonment and kidnapping. He will be eligible for parole in 2030 at the age of 63. Now Hannah's family was extremely disappointed with the sentence. They believed he should spend the rest of his life in prison. For Meninder to be able to get out now in 2021 when I'm recording this, he's eligible for parole in 9 years. He still has a chance at a life, and that is something that Hannah Foster would never have. Had Hannah's 999 call been properly listened to, she could have been saved. The UK police launched a campaign to raise awareness about Silent Solutions feature, and they tried to make everyone aware that if they're ever in a situation where they cannot talk but they need help, to start pushing buttons on the phone. And that is the heartbreaking Hannah Foster case. I do think that police would have eventually come to realize Meninder was their suspect, but his boss calling in a tip was very important in this case because it kind of broke the case. They had their suspect much faster than they would have if they would have had to look into all these different, 7 fans and who know.